Entitled tourist tries to push royal guard, but karma responded soon. Ethan stood motionless outside the palace, his ceremonial rifle held perfectly against his shoulder. 8 years in the guard's position had taught him patience, discipline, and most importantly, how to remain stoic in the face of tourist antics. At 29, he was one of the most respected guards in the regiment, known for his unwavering dedication to tradition. The morning sun beat down on his bearskin cap as he heard them before he saw them, a group of loud tourists approaching his post. Their voices carried across the palace grounds, drowning out the respectful whispers of other visitors. In his peripheral vision, he could see other tourists stepping aside, some shaking their heads in disapproval. "This is going to blow up online," a tall young man with carefully styled hair shouted into a camera. "What's up, future millionaires? I'm Jake Morrison, and we're about to show you how boring these famous guards really are. Make sure to smash that like button and follow us for more epic content." Ethan observed the group. 4 of them, all in their mid-20s, wearing matching t-shirts with "Living My Best Life" printed across the front. They moved like they owned the place, phones held high, barely watching where they were going as they nearly collided with other tourists. "Sarah, get in the shot!" Jake called to a young woman with immaculate makeup and designer sunglasses. "Do that thing we planned." Sarah Chin, her Louis Vuitton bag swinging from her arm, struck an exaggerated pose near Ethan. "Oh my god, these guards are like, so last century. They're basically human mannequins. I can't believe people actually wait in line to see this." The third member of their group, Marcus Rodriguez, circled them with his professional camera, while the fourth, Olivia Thompson, provided running commentary for their live stream. Ethan noticed Marcus's expensive equipment. This wasn't just casual social media posting. They were professional troublemakers. "Look, everyone," Olivia announced to her phone. "We're about to make history. These guards think they're so special with their fancy hats and rules. Wait until you see what we've got planned." A young family with 2 small children moved away from the group, the parents shepherding their disappointed kids to a different viewing spot. Ethan felt a surge of pride in his role, not just as a guard, but as a guardian of tradition that had inspired generations of young visitors. "Hey, Robot Man!" Jake waved his hand inches from Ethan's face. "Anyone home? Or did they program you to just stand here all day?" His friends laughed, encouraged by his boldness. Ethan remained still, his eyes fixed forward. In his years of service, he'd seen countless disrespectful tourists, but something about this group felt different. There was a calculated cruelty in their actions, a deliberate attempt to mock centuries of tradition for a few minutes of internet fame. Probably hired an actor to stand here. No way anyone actually does this job for real. Marcus commented, adjusting his camera settings. An elderly British woman stepped forward, her face concerned. "Young people, please show some respect. This uniform represents..." "Okay, boomer." Jake cut her off with a laugh. "We're creating content here. This is what people want to see. Nobody cares about your ancient history lesson." The woman's face flushed red as she retreated, several other tourists placing comforting hands on her shoulders. Ethan felt his jaw tighten slightly, the only external sign of his growing displeasure. In his mind, he recited the oath he'd taken when joining this position, focusing on maintaining his composure. Then he heard the distinct sound of a coin being removed from a purse. "Watch this," Sarah whispered loudly. "This is going to get us so many views. Maybe we'll even make the news." The coin flew through the air, glinting in the sunlight. Time seemed to slow as Ethan watched it arc toward him from the corner of his eye. It struck his boot with a clear ping and rolled to a stop at his feet. The sound seemed to echo across the palace grounds, though that should have been impossible in the open space. In that moment, something ancient stirred within him. Stories passed down through generations of guards, whispered in the barracks late at night, about times when tradition itself seemed to take physical form. About consequences that befell those who showed exceptional disrespect. There was a reason why the guards maintained their discipline, why they stood unmoved through rain and snow, through taunts and provocations. It wasn't just about ceremony, it was about maintaining a barrier between the ordinary world and something older, something that slept beneath the palace stones. Breaking protocol for the first time in his career, Ethan moved. His movements were deliberate, almost mechanical, as he bent down to retrieve the coin. He held it up, examining it in the sunlight, aware of dozens of phones recording his every move. The crowd had fallen completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. The coin felt warm in his hand, almost alive. As he looked at it, ancient symbols seemed to flash across its surface there for a moment, gone the next. Patterns that reminded him of the old stories, of warnings etched into the guardhouse walls. Ethan's gaze shifted to the group, his eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. He saw the smirks fade from their faces, replaced by uncertainty. Without a word, he slipped the coin into the small ceremonial pouch on his uniform. The leather seemed to warm slightly as the coin settled inside, as if recognizing an old friend. The weight of it felt significant, like it carried more than just metal. Resuming his position, Ethan allowed himself the slightest smile invisible to most, but clear enough to unnerve the 4 troublemakers before him. They would learn, as others had before them, that some traditions carried power beyond mere ceremony. The group retreated, trying to laugh off their unease, already planning how to edit the video for maximum impact. "Whatever," Jake said, his voice slightly shaky. "Let's get some food. This place is boring anyway." But as they walked away, none of them noticed the subtle shimmer in the air around them, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. Nor did they see the way their shadows seemed to stretch and twist, dancing to a rhythm that had nothing to do with their movements. The coin in Ethan's pouch pulsed once, twice, like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. The ancient magic of the palace grounds, dormant for so long, had awakened. Their lesson was about to begin. "Did you see how many people were filming?" Jake exclaimed as the group walked away from the palace. "We're definitely trending by dinner time." He pulled out his phone to check their live stream stats, then frowned. The screen had gone black. "Guys, my phone's acting weird," he muttered, repeatedly pressing the power button. When the screen finally flickered to life, his gallery was empty. Every photo and video from their palace visit had vanished. "No way!" Sarah grabbed her own phone, only to find the same thing. "Everything's gone! Even my Instagram stories disappeared!" She frantically tapped through her apps, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen in frustration. Marcus lowered his professional camera from his neck, checking the memory card. "This doesn't make sense," he said, his face pale. "The card's corrupted. Everything we shot today is just gone." He had never seen anything like it in his years of vlogging. Olivia laughed nervously. "Come on, guys. It's just a technical glitch. These things happen." But her voice trembled slightly as she remembered the guard's piercing gaze. A sudden gust of wind swept through the street, unusually cold for a summer day. Street vendors' napkins swirled in the air, but strangely, only around their small group. Other tourists walked by undisturbed, some giving them odd looks. They decided to grab lunch at a fancy cafe nearby, trying to shake off their unease. Sarah reached for her wallet to pay for their meal, unzipping the hidden compartment of her designer bag where she always kept it. Her hand found empty space. "I can't find my wallet!" she exclaimed, dumping the contents of her bag onto the table. "This is impossible. I never take it out of this pocket. I literally just used it this morning at Starbucks." Just then, a pigeon swooped down from nowhere, targeting Marcus with military precision. A splat of white landed directly on his expensive camera lens. As he jerked back in surprise, his designer sunglasses flew off his face, landing under a passing tourist's foot with a sickening crunch. "This is ridiculous," Jake muttered, pulling out his own wallet to cover the bill. "Just a bunch of coincidences." But his card was declined. Then his backup card. Then his emergency card. The cafe owner appeared at their table, arms crossed. "Is there a problem with payment?" Other diners were starting to stare, some pulling out their phones to record the scene. Red-faced, they had to call their hotel to arrange payment, thoroughly humiliated as other diners watched and whispered. As they left the cafe, Olivia's phone chimed with a notification. Someone had tagged them in a video. The footage showed their entire encounter with the guard, but something was different. From this angle, the guard's movements seemed more menacing, their own behavior more obnoxious. The comments were flooding in by the hundreds. Absolutely disgusting behavior. Who raises people like this? They should be banned from all historical sites. Turn it off, Sarah whispered, hugging herself. The temperature seemed to have dropped again, though the sun was still shining brightly. They hurried back toward their hotel, but every street looked unfamiliar. Their phone maps spun in circles, refusing to show the correct route. A group of pigeons followed them, watching with unnaturally intelligent eyes. Every time they thought they'd found the right direction, they'd end up back at the same intersection. Marcus checked his reflection in a shop window, trying to clean the bird mess off his jacket. But his reflection seemed slightly delayed, moving a fraction of a second after he did. He blinked hard, convincing himself he was imagining things. Okay, this is crazy, he said, his voice cracking. Ever since that guard picked up the coin. Don't! Olivia cut him off. Don't even mention it. We're just having a bad day. That's all this is. Jake tried posting an update to their followers, but every time he hit post, the app crashed. When he finally got a message through, the responses were all negative, thousands of angry comments appearing within minutes. They finally found their way back to the hotel after walking in circles for over an hour. In the elevator, all four of their phones chimed simultaneously. The notification showed they'd been tagged in another video, this one from a different angle, making their behavior at the palace look even worse. We can explain this, Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. We'll just make a response video and... The elevator suddenly stopped between floors, lights flickering. In the mirrored walls, their reflections seemed to smile mockingly back at them, though their real faces were frozen in fear. Back at his post, Ethan maintained his stoic stance, but anyone watching closely might have noticed the slight upturn at the corner of his mouth. The coin in his pouch pulsed steadily, like a metronome counting down to something inevitable. Each beat seemed to synchronize with another misfortune befalling the disrespectful tourists. The lessons of respect were best learned through experience, after all. And for these four, the day's education was far from over. Morning arrived with a flood of notifications on all their devices. The video of their encounter with the guard had exploded overnight, but not in the way they'd hoped. Major news websites had picked up the story with headlines like, "Disrespectful influencers mock royal tradition," and "Social media stars face backlash over palace incident." Jake sat on his hotel bed, scrolling through the chaos on his phone. Their follower counts were dropping by the thousands. Brand deals were disappearing, emails flooding in with phrases like, "termination of contract," and "violation of morality clause." This is a nightmare. Sarah burst into his room without knocking, her usually perfect makeup smeared from crying. My skincare brand just dropped me. 3 years of partnership, gone. All because of that stupid coin. Marcus and Olivia arrived moments later, both looking like they hadn't slept. It's everywhere, Marcus reported, his voice hollow. People are sending the video to our parents, our old schools, everyone. Olivia's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with messages from angry followers. They're making memes about us, she whispered, showing them her screen. Their faces had been edited into hundreds of humiliating images, all featuring that moment when the guard's eyes had locked onto them. Listen to this comment, Jake read aloud, his voice shaking. Notice how the guard's shadow seems to stretch toward them? And those symbols flashing on the coin? Sarah froze, remembering how cold it had gotten after the incident. That's ridiculous, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We need to fix this. Let's go back and record an apology video. Are you insane? Marcus protested. After everything that happened yesterday? We don't have a choice. Sarah snapped. Our careers are literally ending. Look at these numbers. I've lost 50,000 followers since last night. A notification popped up on all their phones simultaneously. Someone had tagged them in a new post. It was security camera footage from the cafe yesterday, showing their cards being declined and Sarah frantically searching for her wallet. The caption read, "Karma hits entitled influencers just hours after disrespecting Royal Guard." How did they get that footage? Olivia wondered, her face pale. And why does the lighting make us look so wrong? In the video, their shadows seemed to move independently, stretching and twisting unnaturally. Jake stood up, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "Okay, Sarah's right. We need to do damage control. We'll go back, film a quick apology, make it look sincere. People love redemption stories, right?" They spent an hour preparing, carefully choosing outfits that looked appropriately humble. But when they tried to film practice apologies in their hotel rooms, strange things kept happening. Their cameras would lose focus, audio would cut out, or mysterious shadows would appear in the background. "Did you see that?" Marcus asked, reviewing his test footage. Behind Jake it looked like someone in a guard's uniform, but when I paused it, nothing's there. The hotel room television turned on by itself, playing news coverage of their video. No matter how many times they pressed the power button, it wouldn't turn off. Their faces stared back at them from the screen, but occasionally, their expressions seemed different from what they remembered. "Maybe we should just leave London," Olivia suggested, her voice trembling. "Go somewhere else and wait for this to blow over?" Sarah shook her head. "My flight app won't work. Neither will the train booking sites. It's like something's keeping us here." A comment on the viral video caught Jake's attention. Legend says those who mock the palace guards face the watchman's curse. The coin is just the beginning. They must make amends or face the consequences. "This is insane," he muttered. "We're letting internet trolls get into our heads. Come on, let's go film that apology and end this." As they left their rooms, none of them noticed how their reflections lingered in the mirrors for a moment too long, wearing expressions of knowing amusement. In the corridor, the emergency exit sign flickered briefly, its green light forming the shape of a ceremonial guard's hat before returning to normal. Down at the palace, Ethan remained at his post. The coin in his pouch grew warmer as the group approached, recognizing their return. Their lesson was progressing exactly as tradition demanded, first the inconveniences, then the social humiliation, and now the mounting dread of something larger looming over them. The morning crowds parted unconsciously around Ethan's post, tourists sensing something ancient and powerful radiating from his stoic form. Their apology video would need to be genuine. The magic of the palace grounds could tell the difference. And if it wasn't, well, there were darker lessons waiting to be taught. The walk back to the palace felt longer than it should have. Every few steps, the group could have sworn they heard the rhythmic march of guard boots behind them, but when they turned to look, the street was empty. Their phones had stopped working entirely now, screens showing only their own reflections, which sometimes seemed to move independently. "Remember the plan," Jake whispered as they approached the palace gates. "We apologize, act super sincere, and get this nightmare over with." His confident tone couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. The usual crowds of tourists were there, but something felt different. As the four influencers approached, people stepped away, creating a clear path to Ethan's post. The movement seemed unconscious, as if the crowd was being gently pushed by an invisible tide. "Is it just me?" Marcus muttered. "Or is everyone staring at us?" He wasn't wrong. Every tourist's phone was raised, cameras pointed their way, but no one was talking or taking selfies. The usual excited chatter had been replaced by expectant silence. Sarah clutched her replacement phone, trying to start a recording. The screen remained black, reflecting something that made her gasp. Ethan stood at his post, exactly as they'd left him the day before. The sun caught his ceremonial buttons, flashing like warning signals. As they drew closer, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath began fogging in the summer air. Marcus raised his new camera, replacing the one that had mysteriously malfunctioned yesterday. "Let's frame this right. We want to look properly sorry, but still get good angles for." "Maybe don't film this," Olivia cut in, noticing how the other tourists were watching them with disapproval. "We should just apologize normally." They approached Ethan's post, and immediately sensed something different about his stance. Though he hadn't moved, his presence seemed more commanding, more intentional. The morning sun glinted off his buttons and rifle, creating an almost intimidating display. "Excuse me, sir," Jake began, trying to project sincerity. "We wanted to apologize for our behavior yesterday. We realize now that we were completely out of line and—" Ethan moved. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but it silenced Jake immediately. The guard took one precise step forward, his movement perfectly controlled and deliberate. His grip on the ceremonial rifle shifted ever so slightly, the polished metal catching the sunlight. The tourist crowd went quiet, phones raised to capture whatever might happen next. The four influencers found themselves taking an instinctive step backward, their practiced apology forgotten in the face of Ethan's silent authority. Sarah stumbled slightly in her expensive heels, catching herself against Marcus. "Maybe we should come back later?" she whispered, but no one moved. There was something in Ethan's stance that kept them rooted to the spot. Through his disciplined expression, Ethan's eyes met each of theirs in turn. His gaze carried the weight of his position not just as a guard, but as a keeper of traditions that demanded respect. The coin from yesterday sat in his pouch, a small but significant reminder of their mockery. Olivia's phone slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering on the pavement. When she bent to retrieve it, she found herself eye level with Ethan's polished boots, the same boots they had disrespected yesterday. The memory of their laughter seemed hollow now. "We understand now," Marcus said quietly, lowering his camera. "This isn't about social media or getting views. This uniform, this ceremony, it means something. We were wrong to mock it." But Ethan's subtle shift in posture made it clear words weren't enough. His stance spoke of centuries of tradition, of discipline maintained through rain and shine, through mockery and respect. The slight tightening of his grip on his rifle sent a clear message. Their superficial apology wasn't going to fix this. The crowd of tourists had grown larger, sensing the tension in the air. Many recognized the group from the viral video, and whispers spread through the gathering. Phone cameras captured every moment of their humiliation. Jake tried one more time. "Sir, we want to make this right. Please, just tell us what we need to do to—" Ethan's only response was to return to his original position with mechanical precision. But somehow this small movement carried more impact than any words could have. It was a dismissal, a statement that their presence was no longer acknowledged. The four influencers backed away, their planned apology video forgotten. Around them, tourists continued filming, this time capturing their retreat. They could already imagine the new wave of social media posts this would generate. "What just happened?" Sarah asked as they hurried away from the palace grounds. "He barely moved, but I've never felt so small. He didn't need to say anything," Olivia replied, glancing back at Ethan's post. "The uniform said it all. We treated this place like a joke, but look at him standing there in the heat, maintaining those standards. We never stood a chance." Behind them, Ethan remained at his post, the coin secure in his pouch. He had delivered his message without breaking protocol or speaking a word. The group would learn, as others had before them, that respect couldn't be faked for social media likes. Defeated and humiliated, the four influencers found themselves sitting in a quiet corner of a park, within view of the palace but far enough away to feel safe from its imposing presence. "I've lost another 20,000 followers," Sarah said, breaking the silence as she stared at her phone. For once, she wasn't trying to frame the perfect selfie or check her engagement metrics. "But somehow, that doesn't seem important anymore." Jake sat with his head in his hands, his carefully styled hair now messy from running his fingers through it repeatedly. "We really messed up, didn't we? Not just the social media backlash, I mean really messed up." He looked up at the palace, where Ethan's distinctive bearskin cap was visible in the distance. "You know what's weird?" Marcus added, his expensive camera lying unused beside him. "I've been thinking about my grandfather. He served in the military, and he always tried to tell me about honor and tradition. I used to tune him out, Thought it was just old people stuff. He picked up a fallen leaf, twirling it between his fingers. I get it now. Olivia was about to respond when an elderly man approached their bench. He walked with a slight limp and carried himself with military bearing despite his age. The group instinctively sat up straighter. Mind if I join you? He asked, though it didn't really feel like a question. His accent was distinctly British, his tone gentle but commanding. I couldn't help but recognize you from the videos. They shifted uncomfortably, expecting another lecture or phone camera to appear. Instead, the man simply sat down, pulling out a worn leather wallet. My name's William, he said, opening the wallet to reveal an old military ID. I served as a guard 40 years ago. That coin you tossed? It reminded me of something that happened during my service. The group leaned in despite themselves, their social media instincts forgotten in the presence of someone who had lived the tradition they had mocked. Back then, we had a saying, William continued, his eyes focused on the palace. The uniform doesn't make the guard honors the uniform. Every button, every step, every moment of stillness represents centuries of service and sacrifice. Sarah touched her own designer clothes self-consciously. We thought it was just for show, she admitted. For tourists like us. William smiled, but it held a touch of sadness. That's what many think. But let me tell you what that guard Ethan, I believe his name is, was really doing when he picked up your coin. The four influencers exchanged surprised looks. You know his name? Jake asked. We all know each other, past and present guards. It's a brotherhood. William straightened his back. When he bent to pick up that coin, he wasn't just breaking protocol. He was making a choice to acknowledge your disrespect in the most powerful way possible by showing you the human behind the uniform, if only for a moment. Marcus's camera remained untouched, though 6 months ago he would have been filming this conversation for content. But why did he keep the coin? In my day, we had a tradition, William explained. Any object thrown at us in mockery was kept until proper respect was shown. Not as a punishment, but as a chance for redemption. He pulled something from his wallet, a small, tarnished coin. This one was thrown at me in 1982. The young man who threw it came back 3 days later with a handwritten apology and a new understanding. We still exchange Christmas cards. Olivia wiped away an unexpected tear. We tried to apologize, but he wouldn't accept it. Because it wasn't real, William said gently. You were still thinking about your followers, your views, your image. The uniform demands authentic respect, not a performance. The group sat in silence, letting his words sink in. Around them, tourists snapped photos of the palace, but for the first time, the influencers noticed how many people also stood in quiet appreciation of what it represented. Sarah looked down at her phone, then deliberately turned it off and put it away. We've been living our whole lives for the cameras, she said quietly. Everything we do is content. Everything is performance. We don't know how to be real anymore. Jake stood up suddenly. We need to do this right, he declared. Not for our followers or our brands, but because it's right. The others nodded, a new determination in their expressions. The setting sun cast a golden light across the palace grounds, and in the distance, Ethan stood at his post, as steady as the tradition he represented. Before you go, William said, standing with slight difficulty, remember this. That uniform represents every guard who's ever stood watch, every ceremony that's marked our nation's history, every moment of dedication that's kept our traditions alive. When you mock it, you mock all of that. As they watched him walk away, his slight limp a testament to his own years of service, the four influencers felt something shift inside them. Their phones stayed in their pockets, their cameras remained off, and for the first time since arriving in London, they weren't thinking about content creation. We need to write letters, Marcus said finally. Real ones, handwritten. Not for show, not to film, just real. The others agreed, and as they left the park, they took one last look at Ethan's post. The guard stood as he always did, but somehow he no longer seemed like a prop for tourist photos. Instead, he was a living link to centuries of tradition, a guardian of something far more meaningful than social media fame. Dawn was breaking over London as the four friends sat in their hotel room, surrounded by crumpled papers and discarded pens. They'd spent the entire night writing and rewriting their letters, trying to find the right words to express their genuine remorse. "Read yours again," Sarah requested, looking at Marcus's carefully handwritten page. For once, her phone lay forgotten on the bedside table, notifications muted. Marcus cleared his throat and began reading. "Dear Ethan, I come from a military family, but somewhere along the way, I forgot what that meant. When my grandfather served, there were no viral videos or social media likes. There was only duty, honor, and tradition. Yesterday, speaking with William in the park, I remembered why my grandfather stood so tall whenever he spoke of his service. I apologize not just for the coin incident, but for forgetting that some things are sacred beyond likes and views." "That's perfect," Olivia said softly, looking down at her own letter. "It's real." Jake had written and rewritten his letter 17 times. The wastebasket overflowed with his attempts to find honest words instead of crafted content. His final version was simple but sincere. "I've spent years chasing fame, treating everything as content to be consumed. Your silence taught me more than 1,000,000 likes ever could. The uniform you wear isn't a costume, it's a symbol of dedication I'm only beginning to understand. I'm sorry for treating it, and you, as props in my social media game." Sarah's letter spoke of learning respect, of understanding that some traditions deserve reverence rather than mockery. She wrote about her own grandmother, who had lived through stories of the guards who maintained their posts even during air raids. Their letters complete, they added one final touch: the combined cost of their designer outfits and camera equipment, donated in cash to a veterans charity. It wasn't about buying forgiveness, it was about showing their changed priorities. As they approached the palace one last time, the morning crowds were just beginning to gather. Some tourists still recognized them, phones raising to record, but this time they paid no attention to the cameras. Ethan stood at his post, sunlight glinting off his buttons and rifle. The four friends approached slowly, respectfully, stopping at a proper distance. Other tourists watched curiously, but the influencers weren't performing anymore. Jake stepped forward first, carefully placing their letters and the charity donation receipt on the ground. He stepped back and, remembering William's words, executed a respectful bow, not for show, but out of genuine respect. The others followed suit, each adding a single fresh rose beside their letters. They stood in silence for a moment, heads bowed, finally understanding the weight of the tradition before them. As they turned to leave, something extraordinary happened. Ethan, in one fluid motion, took a single step forward and bent down. His movements were precise and deliberate as he collected their offerings. Though his expression remained professional, his eyes met each of theirs in turn. This time, there was no coldness in his gaze, only acknowledgement. The coin appeared in his gloved hand, no longer a symbol of mockery but of transformation. He held it out to Sarah, who accepted it with trembling fingers. The metal was warm to the touch, polished to a mirror shine. They left the palace grounds in silence, but it was a peaceful quiet rather than the shame-filled retreat of days before. As they walked, their phones began chiming with notifications. "Look at this," Marcus said, showing his screen to the others. Someone had recorded their moment of apology, but instead of mockery, the comments were supportive. "Now that's real growth. This is how you own up to mistakes. From disrespect to understanding, beautiful to see." Back in their hotel, they found a small package waiting. Inside was a handwritten note in elegant script. "Respect tradition and tradition will respect you." Jake picked up his phone, then put it down again. "You know what? Let's not post about this. Some things should stay private." The others agreed. Their follower counts were recovering, but somehow that seemed unimportant now. They had learned something more valuable than viral fame: the worth of tradition, respect, and genuine remorse. Months later, William received a package containing 4 Christmas cards and a photo. It showed the 4 friends at a military ceremony, standing respectfully as guards marched past. They had returned to London not for content, but to properly honor the tradition they had once mocked. And in a guardhouse at Palace, Ethan kept their letters in his locker. Sometimes new guards, facing their first days of tourist disrespect, would read them and understand that behind every joke and jeer lay the potential for understanding. The coin that started it all found a permanent home in a small display case in the guardhouse, alongside other tokens of lessons learned through the years. Its surface, now polished to perfection, bore a small inscription. From mockery to meaning a lesson in respect. As for the four influencers, their content changed. Their posts began showcasing real moments, genuine traditions, and respectful encounters with history. They had learned that some things were beyond social media's reach, some traditions deserved reverence rather than retweets. And on special occasions, when they passed by ceremonial guards anywhere in the world, they would stop, stand in respectful silence, and remember the lesson that changed not just their online presence, but their understanding of what truly matters in a world too often focused on fleeting fame.